This is Alternative Eye Beyond the File. On this episode, we're going inside the cipher of Dennis Rader, deeper than we even imagined. But what just happened? It changes everything. January 5th, 1988, 1 week after the Fager family is murdered in Wichita, Mary Fager receives a sketch from the killer. In that sketch, he draws a spiral in the window, a specific detail, the basement window. This week I went back to Chapter 8, the cipher that Rader sent to a Wichita news station in 2004. And on this show, you'll find, at the end, I decode the evidence that we have all needed to prove that he was indeed the killer and inside the home. The Fager home has a spiral staircase in the basement. Visible through that window, the green carpet, it's there. The brick border pattern that he drew, it's there. He drew what he saw. Then 17 years later, he named it in code. This is far beyond interpretation. This is a confession. This is proof he was inside that house. On that day in December 1987, when Mary Fager comes home to find her entire family murdered, William Butterworth was suspected. Investigators thought it was a copycat, but it wasn't. It was Dennis Rader, and he's been telling us the whole time. Today, Dr. Wendy Watson and I break down the sketch, the cipher, and the architectural evidence that proves the BTK serial killer indeed killed the Fager family. We're showing you the spiral staircase decoded. We're showing you in the cipher what I found. And we're connecting it to these disappearances, to these Chapter 8 victims. And today we focus on these two families affected and the decades of silence. But I just gave them their answer. I'm Melissa Phelan, your decoder, and Dennis Rader just confessed again. All right, Wendy, well, let's get back into it.
Awesome.
So far in our season, we've introduced audiences to Cynthia Kinney. Today with you, I'd like to go deeper, connecting her case in the Fager family murders to Dennis Rader through Chapter 8. So what I'd love to go over with you is, I guess I'd just like to start with what you think our listeners should understand about what we're about to reveal with this puzzle.
That is an excellent question. I think one of the most interesting things about this puzzle, and I don't want to give Dennis Rader too much credit, but I do think that there are remarkable layers to the puzzle. I'm not certain that he employed any cryptographic analysis or understanding in creating it as much as he had the words he wanted to say and he jumbled them up, but I'm not sure. There may be, I'm a firm believer in the fact that the subconscious kind of gives us away. So I imagine that there is a pattern in there, whether he knew it or not. But I do think that one of the most interesting things about this puzzle is that it is not just a simple word find, right? There are words that you find, in a sort of traditional way. And I mean, the FBI obviously found quite a few of those words. And I think you and I have found a few more.
Yes.
But then there are all these like interconnections and letters that get used over and over again within the puzzle in order to create words. So that it's a puzzle within a puzzle within a puzzle within a puzzle. And I think that's really interesting. I think the layers of meaning mean that the single page of text has volumes of information in it.
Yes, and I know that in a previous episode, and we had touched on it about how you said there was almost some poetry to this, that's the effect that it has, right? And I know through our discussions, you had introduced the idea that he probably was creating this over time.
Yes. I really do think that is true, especially when we started looking at the names, because the names of the remaining victims, or the victims we think he's responsible for, you think we're responsible for, I tend to agree with you. They don't sort of cross over between those blocks of text very much. So there's this sense that, he had created that first block of text at the top and maybe the second one at the same time. And because none of the victims' names are in that third block of text, I do think he added it later. And that was sort of like, well, as long as I'm making this thing, let me throw in some more stuff, right? Let me give you some more hints about what I do.
Yeah.
That third block of text is really important because it's probably the easiest one. Well, that the first and the last are the easiest to find sort of the word search clues, right? That last block of text on the page has his ruses, has how he found his way into people's houses, how he sort of tricked people into letting him in. And it's incredibly important information that is on that sort of superficial level. But then there's this additional layer, and it's not the victims' names. It's more stuff, which is why, again, I tend to think that he maybe created it later and that this was a work in progress. And we're seeing something that had evolved over time.
Yes, and for our viewers on the screen here, I am going to be showing some of these interesting patterns of where he might have started. So, viewers, you're going to see here that there is a significant pattern with the names and the last known locations going through the names, which I will tell you all is something that I decoded as I was putting the graphics together for episode 2, because I challenged myself to go back and decode the names again and then realize that through each of their names, as you all saw, you had their last known location, the city and state, or in Amy Anderson's case, they refer to it as Pinal County in Arizona. So they do have the visuals here. You guys are able to see what's going on here alongside of us. But something really significant I wanted to discuss as far as when this communication came into play, I think that's very important for our viewers. Dennis's last known communication took place in January 1888, a week after the Fagers were murdered. Is here on the screen what I could get online. And it includes the poem and the sketch, and where Dennis denied doing it, but he wrote this poem and he drew this sketch. Well, anyhow, that communication we'll go over later in the episode more in depth. But something that's very important for viewers to know is that this was the last time that Dennis Rader communicated before 2004, where he came back in the game. Now, the thing that's interesting to me, Wendy, that I put together last night as I was just pondering this, which unfortunately Dennis Rader has become part of my daily thoughts and ways.
Yay.
It's not something that I would recommend. But the thing that's interesting to me is looking at the timeline for when his supposed partner, the other killer, went into prison. I believe that was a couple of years right before this communication started back up again. And I wonder, Wendy, if he was not acting alone, maybe something outside of him wanted to start these communications over again, if that makes sense. Because it's like, why stop with the Fagers in 1987? Said you didn't do it, and then suddenly you just dip off as far as communications concerned, but you still kill other victims, right?
Right.
1987 that we
Right.
do know because he
Well,
confessed to
I
it.
think that you're, I mean, again, from talking to you about this in the past, I know your explanation, and I think it's really compelling. And I have my own pet theory of sort of an additional reason that isn't perhaps backed up by the code as much, or by the narrative as what we know from the investigation as much. But I'm really intrigued by this tension that I think existed in his head between the person that he envisioned himself being and the person that he wanted to portray himself as in the media. This image he wanted to project and who he actually was. I think that the Fager murders really brought that tension into almost unbearable relief for him. But I know that there was also a more practical reason that he stopped communicating, which I will let you share because I think I know this is your baby, and I think you're absolutely right about it.
Well, one thing I want to say to you, and this is something that we have not discussed, but we alluded to, was the fact that in the mid 80s, Dennis Rader's wife had made some comments to him. And I will tell you, when he went down the street and killed Maureen Hedge, that took place right before the Fager murders. Why would he decide to go down the street to kill somebody in his neighborhood as methodical and controlled as Dennis Rader is. And in my opinion, the reason that he did that was his own form of intimidation, perhaps toward Paula. She didn't
Mm,
confirm that she knew it was him, right? But then he
right.
goes and he kills this family. He takes out these fantasies on a child the same age as his own daughter at the time in 87. And then he communicates and says, I didn't do it. But then he drops these clues that he was in the home, which we'll dissect
Hmm.
later, and then he never communicates again. I think that's also why, I mean, even though he continued to kill in Wichita, I think that moving outside of the area, just like he talked about, right, about how he would do things differently, and he
Hmm.
did, just like he was talking to Sheriff Eddie Vernon, and he said, well, I got this fantasy I like to discuss with you. And they'd already had notes that said in 1970s he went and did this, right? Or a fantasy that he labeled in these communications.
Hmm.
And the thing is when he went out of the area, it's almost like BTK went silent because he couldn't be that embodiment in the media like you're talking
Right.
about, right? He had to switch that up or else people would know it was him because he'd be moving outside the area. It'd be obvious to his wife that he wasn't in town, and
Right.
that narrative would, it would be more of a chance of him getting turned in. But do you think that by 2004 perhaps Charles Vines has been arrested
Hmm.
and he no longer, I mean, he was still hunting. There were some people down in Oklahoma that he was watching I believe it was a mother and a child. But anyhow, I'll get to my point because I really do believe Charles Vines goes back into prison. BTK is reborn again. And it was
Right.
almost like he wanted to be caught. I mean, chapter 8 really isn't a dead giveaway, but when he did the floppy disk and all that stuff, it's almost like
Yeah.
he knew that monster was about to be released again, right? And his children weren't at home anymore. He didn't have
Right.
anything holding him back. And then maybe would he go after Paula?
Right. No, I think that's a really good point. The floppy disk thing has always really bothered me because again, I don't think he is a super genius, but he was not a dumb man, right? I mean, he was well educated, he was obviously pretty crafty. He knew what he was doing, and the idea of asking the police, "Hey, can you track me with the floppy disk?" and then trusting their answer again, given what he had been doing for as many years as he'd been doing it and the people that we think he was probably collaborating with, there's no way he was that much of a sucker, right? There's no way he really thought the police were going to tell him the truth about that floppy disk. So yeah, I think there had to have been at some level, maybe he was afraid of what he was going to do, right? Like, the urge to kill. And that's an interesting thought. I hadn't really thought about Paula specifically, but maybe he felt this urge coming over him to do something to his own family. And that would have, pointed the arrows right at him as well. But also, it would have. It would have been inconsistent with that construct he had, where he has this very buttoned up lifestyle and then he has this secret life. And I think if those two lives collided, that was going to be a problem for him psychologically as well as practically. So that's an interesting point that maybe he was afraid he was going to hurt Paula. And I don't necessarily think, I don't think Dennis Rader, I could be wrong, but I don't think he's capable of love in the sense that most of us understand it. But it might have really hurt that self image that he had of himself if he sort of gave in and attacked his wife. And the fact that he'd attacked Maureen Hedge, like you said, she was right down the road. That was an uncharacteristic blip in his level of control. So, I think kind of where all this sort of leads to is this notion that right around this time period, right, when he kills Maureen Hedge, who is geographically close and thus dangerous, his wife is starting to, voice suspicions. And then he kills the Fager family, who I think is emotionally too close to him. I think he started to feel like maybe he was losing control of the entire process. And he had to sort of shut down, reevaluate, and start on a new path, which was hunting abroad. And it was safer, but you're right, it meant he couldn't be BTK anymore. And I'm sure that hurt him because he obviously enjoyed, I mean, he gave himself the name. He obviously enjoyed that notoriety. So that yeah, I think that all really tracks for me. That idea that, Marine Hedge and the Fakers were as close to mistakes as he got. Again, one being geographically just too close to potentially evade suspicion, and the other, like you said, that the younger Fager daughter not only was the exact same age as his own daughter, but was his youngest victim, I believe, up to that point, or his youngest female victim at least, and known victim. And her name, right? I mean, his daughter's name was Kerri, and she was Sherri. And I don't know why that he obviously is interested in wordplay and sort of using letters and codes and symbols. And I just have to think that something somewhere in his brain was sending up a flare saying, "You're losing it, man," right? Like you're at this is the danger line. Right? We're in the
Yes.
danger zone here and we've got to back off. And so, yeah, it makes sense that he would go silent, that he would deny the Fager incident and then go silent. Um,
Yes. And we never know what he had going on at home behind the scenes that would
no.
influence him, because it's almost like pathological for him at this point, because he's been writing and taunting the media and he has this persona that he's built up to terrorize. He's a terrorist. And in
Yes,
my
very
opinion, he
much.
still is. He's withholding this information from everyone, including his daughter. He's been playing these mind games and he just doesn't want to be bothered with these other potential, what, almost, it's just like 10, potentially 10 more people if we're really looking at it this way. And it's alarming. But to really just kind of round out, it's more than just a theory. We're really able to tell quite a bit more, which I'm about to move into, something that I haven't even
Mm-hmm.
shared with you yet, Wendy, but I realized it the other night, because we're live, we're pushing these cases forward. That's why your research and everybody else getting involved, there is a reason why we're bringing on the experts that we are, because we do not want to just sit around, speculate, theorize. We actually want to put this into, I don't know, like a living investigation almost, right? Knowing that Dennis had admitted that his wife had made some comments to him, and then he kills Marine Hedge. He
Mm-hmm.
continued the next year to go on to kill Vicky Wegerly, which was
Mm-hmm.
a young mother, with a family. And he even admitted he would have went back and got the kids in the bathroom.
Mm-hmm.
But those kids were actually heroic in their own right, and they tried to protect their mother, and they tried to get out of that window. But
Oh, bless.
anyhow, he wanted those children too, but then if he did kill the Fagers, he went on in 87 to do that. And then I think to almost keep it going but not communicate any further tells a lot, because Paula Rader was referring to the communications itself.
Right.
You write like BTK,
You
you sound
spell
like
like him.
him, you spell like him. So of course, there's going to be one more communication where he's like, "It's not me. I'm not doing this." And
Right.
then he's going to continue to kill two more people, right?
Mm-hmm.
As far as like if it was before Marine Hedge that maybe this convo happened, then he moves on to Vicky Wegerly because he just loves to kill families.
Mm-hmm.
And then he moves on again to Dolores Davis. I mean, it just is so sick. And I really try to
Yeah.
remove my
Yeah.
emotion
I
when we're
think I
breaking
think
into
again,
this.
he had to change his MO a little bit there, but he
Yes.
didn't quite get away from it.
Yes. Well, something that our viewers, and now I get to share with you, Wendy, is I went back because I was paying attention to the days of the week of
Mm.
the known 10 and of the chapter 8 victims. And I will tell you that, and I don't have it right in front of me. I can pull it up, which I probably will for editing. But anyhow, the days of the week, and I was watching the full interview with Sheriff Eddie Verdon, which I would recommend our users check out. It
Mm-hmm.
talks about the latest updates. It's about a half an hour long. I think it was 33 minutes, but it really breaks down, why it is that they believe that he was the prime suspect and that he did commit the abduction and murder of Cynthia Dawn Kinney.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I have a geo map that I've created that is going to be shared live right now, guys. You can see the areas where Dennis was frequenting around Pahuska, and that he was in the area. Although they could not put him at the time he was working at ADT, they've been trying really hard to put him down there in that area. It has been their opinion that he is the one responsible for this crime.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Cindy was taken on a Wednesday. The Fagers, they were killed on a Wednesday,
Sure, no,
because I
take your time.
did find a pattern that was really significant.
Oh,
And
I
then
love
Because so Sheriff Eddie Verdon in this 33-minute video, he was talking about how they knew that it fit the pattern because she was taken on a Wednesday during the day, just like the rest of Dennis's victims. So Cynthia Dawn Kinney, she was taken on June 23rd, 1976. That was a Wednesday. The Fagers were killed on December 30th, 1987. That was also a Wednesday. It happened midday as well. Melissa Witt was taken on December 1st, 1994. That was a Thursday. Amber Barker was taken December 18th, 1996, midday, well, toward the evening, 5 p.m., 6 p.m. roughly, on a Wednesday. Daniel John Smith was found hung from a tree, according to Rader, framed by him and his buddy on Sunday. So that would have been the December 22nd, 1996. Daniel John Smith taken on a Sunday and hung from a tree. And then Amy Anderson, she's the only Chapter 8 victim that was taken on a Saturday. So I think it's very interesting that not only does he admit to all these details, I did it, here it is, and keen details that we will dissect, but it also fits his profile to a T. If he didn't commit these crimes and he was just fantasizing through this puzzle, then how is it that everything fits him, right? And even geographically, we're able to tie him to these areas.
Right. Well, and Daniel John Smith, while I definitely think he's a victim, I don't think he was a victim in the same way, right? I don't, and I could be wrong about this, but I don't think he was like a fantasy victim. I think he was more of again, a practical victim. I wouldn't be surprised if Daniel John Smith had seen something or knew something, and he was tying up loose ends and decided to get a little thrill out of it as long as he was going to do it. So it doesn't surprise me that he would be taken on a different day of the week. But what do we know about that other Saturday case?
So Amy Armenta Anderson, she's the only victim that's quite a ways out of the way. And there's a lot of reasons why this could happen, that he was down in this Phoenix area, Pinell County. But ultimately, from what we do know, there's ties to Pinell County. There's a reason why he might have went down there, especially if he was coordinating perhaps with other groups. But ultimately, when we look at Daniel John Smith and we talk about the framing of multiple innocent men, it's really important because we're discussing the Fagers today, right? And we know that the prime suspect who was acquitted, William Butterworth, was framed. Of course, Rader could have been taking advantage of an opportunity, right? Because his Butterworth showed back up. But if Rader had been stalking the house and maybe perhaps had another person with him, they would have known that all morning Philip was home, that that they had a discussion before Butterworth went to have lunch, and then Butterworth came back a first time where he saw that there was condensation on and he could tell someone was using the spa, and he thought it was Kelly and her boyfriend. And then he left. He went to the mall, and he actually ran into a buddy of his who was a police captain. William Butterworth, he went by Bill. Bill was very well known in Wichita. He had his own business. Hold on, let me just, and even in Carrie Drobin's narration about the Fager murders, we learned more about Bill Butterworth, and he was part of the Contractors Association for Wichita. And he was somebody that people respected. And so when we think about the possibility that these were targeted killings, perhaps just beyond knowing that these guys all had a lot of commonalities with military background and things like that, it's almost like, why these guys? Why Daniel John Smith? Why go out of your way to do this? And if you have two guys, it would make sense because, and I don't want to get too mixed up in all these details because we're just slowly introducing our viewers to this. These are 8 cases.
Right.
So this is just a lot for us all to digest. The reason that we're doing this podcast is so that we can bring light to these cases. This has been sitting in silence for years. I started this investigation in 2020. We respect these families. We also believe that the accuracy is very important. If these children are out on these properties, especially, I want to bring them home. But
Absolutely.
but why?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question. And there are a number of alternatives. One could be that there's something about the guys, right? That there was something about Butterworth. Maybe somehow Rader was connected to Butterworth even loosely, and that's how he found the Fager family. Or maybe Butterworth was himself for some reason, especially, at the time of the Fager killing, if Rader was working for ADT, he could have easily encountered Butterworth as a contractor. And maybe he had a bone to pick with him, right? I mean, who knows? So it was an awesome opportunity to set up somebody he didn't like. And then with Daniel John Smith, it's hard to say whether he was a victim of choice or a victim of necessity. Was he a victim of necessity because Daniel John Smith knew something or saw something or might have seen something that would have eventually led back to Rader, so he had to get rid of him? Or was he a victim of choice because there was something about Daniel John Smith that piqued his interest? Or was there some other reason entirely? Maybe, again, Daniel John Smith is actually what drew Rader. It's very interesting. I just think his victimology is so interesting because he clearly had a preference for young victims. Even when he killed Vicky Wegerly, again, he admitted he wanted to go back he wanted to kill the children. And I wouldn't be surprised if actually the children were the primary target and he had to get rid of Vicky Wegerly first because she was an adult. But then he does have some older victims and some victims who don't quite match his typical victimology. And there's got to be some sort of thread there that connects them. There's got to be some
Yes.
reason.
Has to be, because we don't even know what Daniel John Smith was doing for a living, and the ties that Rader had specifically to Oklahoma beyond his family, right? Because we know there was family members down there.
Right.
So all really valid things to explore and to get us thinking. I do know that Vicky Wegerly did have a daughter, and I believe that she fit the profile of the age range
Mhm.
that Rader preferred. As far as looking at even the idea that Dennis killed even one more person, it's an enormous claim. And we want to make
Right.
sure that as we walk ourselves and our viewers through, that we're really bringing something of value, especially to these families, because I think it's just so important to address how that ripple effect still lives on, the terror that Dennis has inflicted and the impact on these victims and their families, on these communities. It's still alive and well today.
Well, and that's also that's a I mean again a really good point about that, about Daniel. Maybe it's also possible that that was another way to inflict pain on the family, right? As you pointed out, he made himself into Wichita's boogeyman, right? He made himself into the thing everybody was scared about, right? There was that poor woman whose name is escaping me, who got the letter saying, "Oh, you didn't show up," right? Like I was gonna kill you, and you didn't show up. And I believe she moved immediately, like was out of there, out of Wichita, out of Kansas. Peace
Right.
out. People were terrified of him. And I think you're right. I think he really thrived on that fear that he was creating. Now, he couldn't do the same sort of thing with these more far-flung victims, right? He couldn't write to the media in these other communities. He couldn't announce who he was, but he could bring more pain to this family by effectively implicating another member of the community in Cynthia Dawn Kinney's death. Because I know that is my recollection is that people thought that he was responsible because he took his own life so soon after the murder. Yeah, that it could have just been psychological torture. Boy.
Yes. And it's very it's just typical Raider.
Thank-
Revisiting Cindy Dawn Kinney, and we don't know, she was working in a family owned laundromat. We don't know much about her family, and we're not wanting our audience to go in and to start showing up to these locations. I don't want you guys
No.
going to Wichita. We don't want you interfering with these investigations. What we do want to do is to highlight these victims. These are cold cases. Many of them have not been in the media whatsoever. Cindy Dawn Kinney was associated with Dennis Rader in 2023 onward because of the work of Osage County Sheriff and everything else that's taken place.
Mhm.
Now, but we don't know if there is a reason why he chose Cindy or if he just had this fantasy, like he was saying. Even to Sheriff Verdon, he said, "Oh, I have this fantasy. Let me tell you about it." When he met
Mhm.
with him in person, and he's talking about it like he didn't do it. He's like the typical crazy guy or whatever, psychopath that's like,
telling you everything they're about to do to you while they deny that they do it. Oh, I would never cheat on you, honey. I'm like the best person ever. And he's like a serial cheater, right? So
Right.
they're always telling you
Fascinating. Yeah.
basically like duper's delight and like, I'm going to tell you everything I'm going to do to you beforehand kind of thing, which is
Yeah.
a trait of these types of people. So in a way, he applied that to the Fagers writing that letter. It's not that Dennis is that complex, even though I think he thinks he is. It's almost like that duality kind of like, it's like that space in between. And I think that space in between of really understanding, because he is not BTK and Dennis Rader. He is Dennis Rader. I don't like to sensationalize it, but ultimately we don't know what truly motivated him. He referred to these as projects, as hits. And Cindy was a cheerleader from high school. She was doing
Mhm.
great in school. And I will tell you every day, Wendy, that when I'm praying, they're not far from my thoughts, you know? And I
Mhm.
think about having a funeral for Cindy and Amber and bringing them home, which is truly why I made this show. It's
Mhm.
why I put so many years of effort into this. And before I ever came public, I made sure that I did things the right way according to the system and how it should be done. I sent the reports, I followed up. And the silence and nobody ever knowing about these people out here, potentially these other victims, while Dennis sits over in El Dorado and he's going to die. This
Right.
guy's maybe got a couple more years left. I know he's comfortable in his lifestyle with his groupies and his tablet and his cell phone. He gets to sit up there and he has his routine. It should be something upon all of our hearts to do the right thing here. These
Right.
victims, they matter so much. And
They
it's very hard, even
they
as an
do.
investigator.
Yeah, and like you said, these are open cases. It would be incredible to, I don't know, I don't think it would necessarily be comforting to the families to know, but that's not for us to judge. They deserve information. And, and to the extent that we can, if you can connect these victims to a known offender who had a pattern, who has fantasies that he has been very open about, right, with his drawings and his writings and his communications, then it's possible to potentially find them, right? It's not just about knowing who did it, but about finding them. And that would be incredible because the thought of these poor girls just out there in the wild is deeply upsetting.
It is. And to know that their funeral is given to them by Dennis Rader breaks my heart over and over again. I have
Yeah.
a son, he's almost 10 years old. We all have children we've cared about if we don't have our own kids.
Mhm.
And it's just to be able to do this to a child and enjoy it, to be able to videotape or take photographs like these guys are, Dennis did these things. We know who he is, so it's easier to take his own communication, a piece of evidence, which I would love to kind of break this down with you real quick, Wendy, as
Sure.
far as a piece of evidence, because we know he sent this was his communication. I even looked through and his fingerprints were on it because I went through the FBI's vault
Right.
on this, so we know he wrote it.
Right.
And it says all over there, I confess. And as you all can see on your screen right now, I'm showing you that I'm guilty, I confess. And here's a few of his confessions here, ladies and gentlemen. Just to also finish my point, which I'll get back into later. The reason why I have not approached the families first before I went public with this information is the nature not only of Dennis Rader and these investigations and the sensitivity, but also because of the complexity of my work. I did not want to cold call these families, tell them that I'm a remote viewer, and open a can of worms of God knows what, and them not understand who I am, what I bring to the table as an investigator, and how much I care about these victims, how these people, they're not victims to me. These children, these women, these men, they mean something very much to me because of the perspective and the lens that I am able to get this information through.
Yeah.
For me, it's like it happened yesterday. And I know that's how these families feel. And
Yeah.
in a way, I don't even feel like I have a right to compare my experience to theirs, but I am there with them in spirit and in heart every day, even if they don't know me. And so I hope that if anyone listening is a survivor of Dennis Rader, their family was hurt by him, I hope that you're able to see that there is a reason why this has been very hard to dissect. It's been very hard, probably, for law enforcement in 4 states to go through. So, although I am not here to challenge them, I am here to say, please, if I can do anything with the help of my colleagues, Wendy, our guest on here, if there's anything that we can do to break this down in a way that shows you that Dennis most likely did this, and we have to go, please, please search these properties. Please go find this hidey hole in Wichita. I've given you the codes. I've given you the criminal analysis. I've given you the geospatial patterns. Please do something about this.
Yeah.
And I trust that you all are. But if
Yeah.
through the media, we can do this in a way that is respectful and we're not reliving what we already know, because with Dennis, we hear the same story over and over again.
Right.
It's the same regurgitated story of the horrors that he committed. And it's like almost like we forget about these people. We forget
Right.
about the people that are still living through that.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's really critical to remember that this is not, I think that's something I hadn't really thought about with your method before of how the immediacy that it creates for you and the sort of intimacy it creates between you and these victims. As you know, I do investigative genetic genealogy, and when we're working on a Doe case, we're all about the hunt, right? It's a puzzle and we're just trying to solve it. And then there's that moment when you figure out who the person is and it just hits you. Like now they have a name and suddenly you see that like in your head you can see them with their family and you can see them in that moment when they died, and it's totally different. Nothing has changed, right? It was John Doe before, and now the person has a name. It was the same victim the whole time, but there's something that just shifts in you emotionally when you get that resolution. And it's part of it is good, right? Because you feel like you've accomplished something, but part of it is just absolutely heartbreaking. And I can't imagine the emotional toll that this work takes on you, sort of reliving that immediate and intimate experience of loss over and over again. Even though they're not people that you know directly, there is, I think, it's like vicarious trauma, right? That you're experiencing over and over again. I appreciate the fact that you don't want to create more trauma for these families. This isn't about dredging up the past just for ratings or hits or views or something like that. This is really about making sure that these people who are lost don't remain lost, that we at least have some idea about what happened to them. And maybe if we know that Dennis Rader is the one who did it, even if we can't leverage that information directly to find them, maybe we can put some pressure on Dennis Rader. And in those last, like you said, in his last few years, and get some answers out of him, which would be valuable.
Yes, and extremely important, I think, for every person that's ever known of Dennis, or for the citizens of Wichita and all these people that still live with this, his family. I mean, the countless victims, if we want to label it, people that have been at his hands and experienced their life in turmoil.
Oh, of course.
There's
Including his
just
own
this.
family.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I can't tell y'all what it's like to do this from my perspective. I think that operationally, I have refined what I do. It's very sharpened. And because of my life and the training I've been through and things like that through my experiences, my pattern recognition is very sharpened, more so
Mhm.
than the average person, obviously. But I take what I do to heart. And I also, for me, it's a vocation. It's a spiritual experience, like many people where God guides their life. And I just care so much about the outcome, because I know what it's like to lose someone and to never feel like you'll ever know the truth, right?
Right.
So I share that with these families. They just don't know that about me. And it's, the other night I couldn't sleep. And this is, I'd like to move into this. The other night I couldn't sleep. And it was after I had listened to Carrie's narration
Mhm.
on Cynthia Dawn Kinney and on the Fagers, and she did such a beautiful job putting that together. And so thank you, Carrie. But the way that she told the story to me was like, it was the first time I'd ever heard these people that I care for so much. Truly felt like I heard their story in a way that even impacted me. And it was like bringing them back to life.
Right.
I was lying awake, and I kept, for some reason, my mind kept taking me back to the basement of the Fager. So I was on a trip and I just was trying to have a relaxing weekend, but I opened up my laptop at 3 a.m. and I'm just sitting down there in the basement. I pretended like I was sitting on the recliner here in these photos, ladies and gentlemen, our audience, people listening. But ultimately, I was sitting on this recliner and I just could not leave that spot in my mind. And I said, I'm missing something here. And sure enough, I pull back up the drawing here that you guys can see. And I am not only analyzing that it's obvious Dennis has been in this room. I mean, if we look here, and I will also at the end of this episode post the AI analysis for everyone that compares this sketch to the actual photographs of the interior of this basement. This is where the spa and the hot tub was, where the girls were found floating in the hot tub with the cover over them. And Philip was upstairs dead from 2 gunshot wounds. And as I'm in my mindset, I'm experiencing it from Rader's perspective, which this is the first time I'm ever really sharing with our audience that whenever I remote view what I am accessing, I might not be able to explain it, but it's different memories and states of consciousness. So I see Dennis Rader and he's having his own sexual fantasies, but this is after he's gone back to his house. So I'm like in his mindset thinking about him preparing this letter to Mary Fager. And he's drawing this and nobody's there. So he goes back home after he commits this homicide and he's taking a shower. Then I move forward and all of a sudden he's at this table and he's like drawing this sketch. He's just laughing to himself because there's a side of Dennis that really nobody knows. It's a very cocky, I mean, they know he's this way, but it's like when he's actually living it. So this is how I got into his mind because I was able to see this clearly of him. He's remembering being in that basement and I see him in that reflection. He really wanted to draw his own face really bad, but instead he draws a spiral for the spiral staircase. And here it is on your screen. And there it is. I mean, I didn't even see that. I never saw the spiral.
I remember when I got that message from you about the spiral, and I had looked at that picture, obviously, during our communications many times, and I always saw that as the profile of a person's face. So I think that's interesting that your perspective was that he wanted to put himself in that reflection. I think he did. And again, there's just so many layers to that, right? I mean, there's the physical spiral staircase, there's that sort of vague profile of a man, and the idea that like he's part of the structure of that house now, right? Like it's inseparable. And that it also reflects this incredibly twisted way that his brain works. It's just again so many layers of symbolism and meaning, and I if it were any other sort of case, I would not be inclined to ascribe that to him. But we know how he feels about symbols, right? In the poem that he sent to Mary Fager, for example, the symbolism and this sense of ritual that he sort of post hoc uses to rationalize what he's doing. I do think some of that was very intentional, and it gives me chills to think of him drawing that spiral profile and assuming that no one would ever notice it. But you did.
Yes. And back in 87, because I've scoured what's available on the internet, I'm actually going to have to go to Sedgwick County to go through the old newspaper. I got to get my hands on whatever. What are those machines called, Wendy? Do you know? I don't know.
A microfiche machine?
Yes, I've never used one, but maybe you and I should take a vacation to fucking Wichita and
I'm old enough that I have done a lot of microfiche research, so yeah, happy to help.
Oh, I would love to bring you there then. I'd just be like, we're going to bring you down, Wendy. And I think that would be really great. Maybe we could do that at the end of the season or something into next year. But ultimately, there's so much that I can't see. And I did find a very nice reference sheet from the trial itself that had all of the newspaper releases and everything else. And there is something, even for anybody that might be listening that is in Wichita, that has been a resident as far back as whatever, you old timers out there in Kansas. There was a juryman. His name was Ron Blasey. I hope I said his name right. But he released a pamphlet after this regarding the dark side of the trial for Butterworth. And I'm really trying to get my hands on that, y'all. I know it's a relic. It's out there. It was sold on a few websites, but I can't track it down. So if anybody has evidence of the contents of that, what he was distributing in neighborhoods across Wichita regarding Bill Butterworth and the trial itself, please reach out to me. These cases are so complex, and with what we know about Cindy Kinney, we know she was never seen again, and the impact on her family. And I think they're still living, so the impact on the family and everybody in the town, and just wanting to know where she is. And if she is just a short drive away down in this area that he has indicated, I just want everyone to know I've tried my very best. I'm not trying to cry.
I know.
I've tried my best. I know I can't go down there because this is an ongoing investigation and I'm the one that's also cracking these codes. But I
Right.
very much trust the information that I'm getting, just like with what I was sharing with you all about how I was in Rader's head the other night. I see him fantasizing about this spiral staircase and he's fixated on it because it was he used it a couple times during the
Right.
commission of these crimes. He admits in the puzzle, and I'm going to do a live decoding here on the show. Ladies and gentlemen, whatever I come up with after I get off here with Wendy today will be on display. I guarantee you there's going to be something about that fucking staircase
Yeah.
in that puzzle, and it's heartbreaking. But then I go and I look right there and I see it. I've done this thousands of times. It's been verified. Some of the people I've worked cases with, experts, guys you can for sure trust, they will be on this show as we progress. And I just want you all to understand that even I'm constantly learning as I'm doing this. This for me is not about convincing you that I'm right or that remote viewing is real or how is it that I'm doing this. I really want to focus on what can we do as a society, as a community, to bring these victims home and others like them that are out here stuck cold in silence for how long.
Right.
So I really do hope that I'm, as a host, and I'm being very vulnerable here. I think I needed to let you guys in a little bit because truthfully, it's not even more so that it's just the right thing to do. It's because as a society, we really need to see these changes. And I know it's very uncomfortable for a lot of people. But these systems and the way that they are, there's no excuse for it to remain this way anymore. Would you agree, Wendy? I mean, is there an excuse in 2025, almost 2026, as to why we cannot be organizing and making our information more concise and having more of these systems in
Yeah.
place that benefit us?
No, I mean, again, this is something that you and I've talked about at some length that, in the 70s and 80s, technologically, it was difficult to centralize information and to share information. Things would come across a teletype or over a fax machine, and you just didn't necessarily have access to what was happening in other jurisdictions. And we know that a lot of killers took advantage of that. The fact that authorities from one jurisdiction to the other didn't talk to each other because they couldn't or practically do that. And they all had different ways of recording information. They all had different abbreviations that mean one thing in one place and something else someplace else. And it's this patchwork that was almost impossible to put together. But we have the technology now to do that, right? We have the ability to put people together. And there's a dark side to that, as you and I have discussed, right? The people who have these dark desires can find each other and they can use some of these resources to hide, but we have to be using the same resources they're using to find them, right? We have to be using those same technology to build an information structure across jurisdictions, not just within the United States even, but internationally, so that people can't hide. And I don't mean to erode people's privacy, right? It's not about that. Do what you want in your own house for the most part. But at the same time, when you're committing crimes, there should be a way for a jurisdiction in Australia to let the world know, hey, we have an offender who did X, Y, and Z, and that information is in a consistent format that can be matched, right, or searchable to people in other jurisdictions so that these people, these serial offenders in particular, or networks of offenders who are using patterns, they're using systematic modus operandi. I don't know what the plural of that is. They are being systematic in their own behavior. If they're being systematic, we should be able to spot those patterns. And it shouldn't fall on the shoulders of one person who has these kind of preternatural pattern recognition skills, but that's what computers do. Computers find patterns. Computers are
Yes.
built off of patterns. That's what we have, huge data analytic capabilities. We should be able to analyze this data, but we're not recording it properly. We're not, being uniform in the way that we store the data so that jurisdictions can talk to one another. And it's a huge challenge, but I feel like it's one that we're up to and one that we have an obligation to undertake because we're all in this together, right? Every corporation, every individual, every government, we are all in this to be living in a safer, more just world, I would hope. And so I think it's worth expending the resources to do that. So yeah, no, I agree with you 100%.
Yes. And it's just so important, I think, for the accountability aspect. And there has to be a more organized or evolutionary way for us to not only share information, but hold people accountable
Yes.
as citizens, as taxpayers, and to deploy people within our communities when at the moment the crime takes place. Because I will guarantee, and there's going to be experts that come on that can attest to the value of bringing somebody on like me when the crime takes place. Get it at the beginning. Let's get these guys now. Don't
Right.
let these cases go cold, right? And it's the same with bringing on geographical profilers, even part time, contract based people that can do this. But there's so much value to these methods, and they're being taught worldwide and adopted by world police organizations. So there's so much to it, but it's also to the point that we just got to keep it simple. We can't keep overwhelming ourselves with the latest and greatest, and we
No.
really do need to master right where we're at, so to
Right.
speak.
Right, right. And no, I think that is absolutely true. We have the tools. We need to take the time to figure out how to leverage them rather than continuing to build new tools. We have to slow down and use what we have instead of just continuing to build a better mousetrap but never putting any cheese in it, right? we've got to do something about that.
Yes. I think in a way that as far as Alternative Eye and the colleagues and amazing people just like you, Wendy Watson, that are coming along for this journey, we are actually building our own machines and it's exciting. January 5th, 1988. Dennis Rader draws a spiral in the window of his sketch, a specific detail, something only the killer would know. This week, I went back to Chapter 8, as you guys know, and tonight I knew exactly where to look. 30 seconds, that's all it took. Did I not say I would do it, y'all? And through the Fager family names right there in the cipher in the first section, he told us. Spiral staircase. He was in that basement, y'all. He saw it. He drew it. And 17 years later, he encoded it. Mary Fager, if you're listening, I found him. He confessed. In his own words. The silence ends here. This is Alternative Eye Beyond the File. I'm Melissa Phelan. Please subscribe on our YouTube. Follow us, like, and comment. What do you see when you look at this cipher, and how do you feel about this evidence now decoded live? We're here to solve the most complex cases, and we're doing it unlike ever before, making history here on Alternative Eye. Visit thealternativeeye.com, subscribe to our mailing list, and get the latest updates anywhere you can. We really need to bring these victims home and the truth to be told.